Okay, all right. I'm going to try to say this while I can still get the order right, because Elin and I have been going back and forth about the order for the last 40 minutes. And I think if I don't just start talking one version, my version, right now it's going to become something else. It's already becoming something else. Every time we describe it to each other, it moves a little. We're on the trail. We're still on the trail. We haven't gone back down yet. We're sitting on a rock about 200 meters from the tape and we're not touching. And the weather is, it's fine. The weather is actually beautiful, which is the kind of thing that makes you want to laugh because the sky is enormous and blue and the heather is out and we are falling apart on a mountainside in the most postcard perfect light I've ever seen. Ellen is here. She can hear me. She's sitting about 4 feet to my left and she's not looking at me. She's looking at the valley. She says it's a valley. I need to say that now because it matters later, and I want it on record. She says it's a valley. I'm looking at the same piece of ground she's looking at, and I see a ridge. A long, low, heather-covered ridge that runs roughly north for about half a kilometer before it drops off. The ridge is maybe 10 meters higher than where we're sitting. It's right there. I can see the gorse along the top of it. Elin says there's no ridge. That's where we are. That's the situation. We started walking this morning at about 8. We drove from the B&B in Kinlochleven. Nice place. The woman who runs it does a full Scottish breakfast, and she put extra tatty scones on the plate for Elin because Elin had said the night before that she'd never had one, and the woman took this as a personal mission. And we parked at the trailhead for the circuit route around the south side of the reservoir. It's a 12-kilometer loop, moderate, well-marked. There are wee wooden posts with yellow arrows. You can't get lost. We've been doing walks like this all week. An hour in, maybe an hour and 10, we came to a section where the trail runs along the edge of a plateau and you can see down into a kind of bowl on the left. And the bowl is fenced off. Not fenced with a real fence, taped, orange tape on metal stakes, the kind they use for survey boundaries or ground nesting bird exclusions. There was a sign on the nearest stake. The sign said, "Restricted Area. Archaeological Survey in Progress. No public access." Ellen stopped. She read the sign. She looked over the tape into the bowl. She said, "There's a building down there." I looked. I saw moorland. I saw heather and grass and a few rocks and the bog-dark ground that you get up here when the water table is close to the surface. I did not see a building. I said, "Where?" She pointed. She said, "There, the stone walls. See the corner?" I looked where she was pointing. There was a cluster of rocks, lichen-covered, low to the ground. They could have been the remains of a wall, or they could have been rocks. Up here, the distinction is not always clear. The highlands are full of stones that look structural and structures that look like stones. I said, "I think those are just rocks." She said, "No, look. There's a right angle. See? That's a corner. That's definitely a wall." I looked harder. I could see, maybe, a right angle, or I could see two rocks that happened to be near each other at approximately 90 degrees. I said, "Maybe." She said, "Let's go look." I said, "It says no public access." She said, "It's an archaeological survey, not a military base. Come on, 5 minutes." This is the part where I made the choice. I want to say that clearly. Elin suggested it. I could have said no. I said okay. We stepped over the tape, both of us, together. My right foot went first, then my left, and Elin was next to me. She was on my left. She's always on my left when we walk. It's a thing. I don't know why. She just gravitates to the left. And we walked down the slope into the bowl. The ground was dry under my feet. I remember this because I had expected it to be wet. It looked boggy from the trail, but it was firm and dry, short grass, almost pleasant to walk on. I said something about it. I said, "This is nicer than the trail." Ellen said, "It's soaking. My boots are already wet." I looked at her boots. They looked dry. She looked at my face and said, "What?" I said, "Your boots look dry." She said, "They're not. I can feel the water." I let it go. I let it go because the ground under my feet was dry, and sometimes the ground is different 3 feet to the left. And I was not thinking about inconsistencies. I was thinking about the rocks and whether they were a wall and how long we had before we should turn back. We walked for about 5 minutes. The bowl was deeper than it looked from the trail, or felt deeper. The slope was gentle but continuous, and the trail behind us rose up and became a line against the sky that seemed further away than 5 minutes of walking should have produced. The heather was thicker here. The light was the same blue sky, the same clean highland light. But the quality of the air was different. Not colder, stiller. The kind of stillness where you notice the absence of wind because you'd been leaning into it without realizing. We reached the rocks. I'm going to describe what I saw, and then I'm going to ask Elin to describe what she saw. And if she says something that contradicts what I've said, you'll just have to hold both versions, because that is what we have been doing for 40 minutes, and it is the thing. I saw a depression in the ground, roughly rectangular, about 4 meters by 3. The edges were defined, not sharp, but clear enough that you could see where the ground level dropped by about half a meter into a kind of shallow pit. The bottom of the pit was dark earth, not grass. There were stones around the edges, some of them large, some of them small, all of them settled into the ground in a way that suggested they had been there for a very long time. It looked like a foundation. It looked like the footprint of a building that had been removed. Not collapsed, removed, taken away. The walls lifted off and the ground left behind, like pulling a tooth and leaving the socket. That's what I saw, a hole in the shape of a house. Elin, tell him what you saw. She's shaking her head. She doesn't want to do this again. We've done it 3 times already. She says it changes when she says it. She says every time she describes it, it becomes more like a description and less like a memory. I understand that. I feel it too, but I need her to say it because otherwise it's just my version, and my version includes a hole in the ground, and her version includes something else. She says, okay, she's talking. She says she saw a structure. Walls, stone walls, about chest height, roughly rectangular. No roof, no door. Or the door had fallen in or been removed. She says the walls were solid. She says she walked up to the nearest wall and put her hand on it, and the stone was warm from the sun and rough under her fingers and real. She says there were moss and lichen on the lower courses, and the mortar between the stones was old, powdery, pale gray. She says she leaned against the wall. I watched her lean against the wall. This is the part I need to say carefully because this is the part where it breaks. I was standing about 3 meters from the edge of the depression. Elin was standing at the same spot, 3 meters from the edge. She was on my left. She reached out her right hand and she leaned forward slightly, and her hand came to rest on nothing, on the air, on a point in space that was about a meter off the ground and directly above the edge of the depression, where, in my version, there was no wall and no stone and no surface of any kind. Her hand stopped. Her body weight shifted forward. She was leaning. She was resting her weight on something I could not see. I said her name. She looked at me. She said, "What?" I said, "What are you leaning on?" She said, "The wall." She said it the way you'd say the table or the car. A thing so obviously present that the question is absurd. I walked toward her. I walked around her. I looked at the space where her hand was resting. I could see her hand. Her fingers were curved slightly, the way fingers curve around on a rounded surface. Her palm was flat. There was a slight indentation in the skin of her palm where the surface I could not see, was pressing into it. I reached out and put my hand next to hers. My hand went through, not through a wall, through nothing. My hand moved through the air where her hand was resting on stone, and my hand encountered no resistance, and my hand came out the other side, and I was standing with my arm extended through the space where she was leaning, and she was leaning, and I was reaching, and we were occupying the same coordinates with different results. She pulled her hand back. She said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Elin, there's no wall." She said, "I'm touching it." I said, "I know you're touching it. I can see you touching it. I put my hand in the same place and there's nothing there." She stared at me. She put her hand back on the wall. She knocked on it. 2 deliberate knocks with her knuckle, the way you knock on a table to prove it's solid. I heard the knocks. I heard them. 2 dull impacts on stone. I heard them, and I could not see what she was knocking on. I knocked on the same spot. My knuckles met air. No sound. We stood there. The sky was blue. The heather smelled like heather. A bird, a pipit or something, small, brown, was singing from somewhere upslope. The world was beautiful and fine, and my girlfriend was leaning on a wall that did not exist, and I was standing in a hole that she could not see. She said, "Take a photo." I took out my phone. I photographed the depression, the rectangular pit, the dark earth, the stones around the edges. I showed her the screen. She took out her phone. She photographed the structure, the chest-high walls, the missing roof, the lichen on the stone. She showed me the screen. I looked at her photo. I saw walls, clear, sharp, sunlit stone walls. I could see the texture of the mortar. I could see a small plant growing from a crack between 2 stones in the lower left corner. The photo was of a real structure, photographed in real light by a real camera. She looked at my photo. She saw a hole in the ground. We looked at each other. This is the point where I need to tell you what happened next, because what happened next is the part that I have been unable to make sense of, and that Ellen and I have been arguing about for the past 40 minutes. Not because we disagree about the facts, but because we disagree about what the facts mean. And the disagreement is, I think the disagreement is permanent. I think the disagreement is the point. I think the thing in the bowl showed us something about the difference between us that has always been there and that we have never had a way to see before. And now that we've seen it, I don't think we can unsee it. She said, "This is insane." I said, "I agree." She said, "One of us is wrong." I said, "I don't think either of us is wrong." She said, "That's not how reality works. There's either a wall or there isn't. There's either a structure or a hole. One of us is seeing something that isn't there." I said, "Or one of us isn't seeing something that is." She looked at me. She said, "That's the same thing." I said, "It's not." And this is where the argument started. Not a fight. I want to be clear. Aylin and I don't fight. We never have. We are 2 calm, rational people who process disagreement through conversation, which is one of the reasons we work, one of the reasons we've lasted 3 years, one of the reasons we're on a walking holiday in Scotland in the first place, instead of at a resort somewhere with separate pool chairs and emotional distance. We talk, we're good at talking. We are the couple that other couples say, "You're so good at communicating" about, and we take that compliment seriously, and we have earned it. We stood in the bowl, in the restricted area, with the orange tape behind us on the rise, and we communicated. She said the structure was real. She said she could touch it. She said the stone was warm and rough and present, and her hand confirmed it, and her eyes confirmed it, and her phone confirmed it, and she was not going to stand in a field in Scotland and be told that the wall she was leaning on was not there. I said the depression was real. I said I could see it. I said the earth was dark, and the edges were defined, and the stones around the rim were arranged in a way that suggested human placement, and my hand passed through the space where her wall was and met no resistance, and my phone confirmed a hole where her phone had confirmed a wall. She said, "Then one of our phones is wrong." I said, "Both phones are showing what we each see." She said, "Cameras don't have opinions. Cameras record light. If the wall is there, the camera should see the wall. If the hole is there, the camera should see the hole. They can't both be right." I said, "They're both right." She said, "You sound like you've already decided what this is." I said, "I haven't decided anything. I'm describing what I see." She said, "You see a hole?" I said, "Yes." She said, and you think I'm hallucinating a wall. I said, I didn't say that. She said, you're thinking it. I said, I'm not. I believe you can see it. I believe you can touch it. I'm telling you that I can't. She walked away from the wall or from the edge of the hole, depending on which of us is describing the motion. And she stood about 5 meters away, and she turned around and she looked at it, and she said, it's still there. I looked at the same spot. The hole was still there. She said, come here. I went to where she was standing. She pointed. She said, tell me what you see from here. From where she was standing, 5 meters back, looking at the site, I saw the depression, the rectangular pit, the dark earth, the stones. She said, you still see the hole? I said, yes. She said, I'm standing right next to you and I see a building. I said, yes. She said, then one of us is in the wrong place. And the way she said wrong place, not wrong as in mistaken, wrong as in should not be here, was the first moment I felt afraid. Not of the structure or the hole or the restricted area. Afraid of the look on her face, afraid of what she meant by one of us. We tried other things. I want to list them because I want it known that we were systematic. We are systematic people. We stood side by side and described what we saw simultaneously, out loud, word by word, to see where the descriptions diverged. They diverged at the site. The heather was the same, the sky was the same, the slope behind us was the same, the rocks scattered across the rest of the bowl were the same. Only the site was different. She walked into the structure. I watched her walk into the depression. She stepped over what she described as a threshold, a worn stone sill at the entrance, and she stood inside the walls which came to her chest, and she was standing inside a roofless building, looking out at me. I watched her step into the pit and descend 1/2 meter to the dark earth floor and stand in a hole in the ground, her head and shoulders above the rim, looking out at me. I said, what does the floor feel like? She said, stone, flagstone, cold, even. I said, for me, it's earth. She said, come in. I stepped in. The floor under my feet was earth, soft, damp. The ground was damp down here inside the depression, although it was dry everywhere else. And I could feel the unevenness of it, the slight hummocks and hollows of disturbed ground. I was standing in a hole. Aylin was standing in a room. She reached out and took my hand. Her hand was warm and solid in hers. She said, can you feel me? I said, yes. She said, can you see me? I said, yes. She said, then we're in the same place. I said, we're in the same place and it's two different things. She dropped my hand. She climbed out. I climbed out. We stood on the edge, the rim, the threshold, and we looked at it. And I want to describe the quality of the silence between us at that moment, because the silence is the thing I keep coming back to. It was not an angry silence. It was not a confused silence. It was the silence of two people standing at the exact same point in space and realizing that the point does not agree with itself, that the ground beneath them has two opinions about what it is, and each opinion is complete and detailed and supported by photographic evidence. And the two opinions are mutually exclusive. And the two people standing there are on different sides of a line that runs through the center of the same coordinate. I have been with Ellen for 3 years. In those 3 years, we have disagreed about films, restaurants, politics, her sister's husband, whether the bedroom window should be open at night, and the correct way to load a dishwasher. In every disagreement, we have eventually found a common ground, a shared reality we could both stand on, even if we stood on different parts of it. The dishwasher has a correct way, and we found it. The window has a temperature threshold, and we agreed on it. Her sister's husband is difficult but not malicious, and we both accepted this. Here, standing in the bowl, there was no common ground. The ground itself was the thing we couldn't agree on. She said, we need to go. I said, I think we need to talk about this. She said, I don't want to talk about it here. I want to go back to the trail and walk back to the car and drive to the B&B and sit down somewhere normal and then talk about it. I said, what if it's different at the B&B? She stopped. She looked at me. She said, what do you mean? I said, what if we get back to the B&B and the B&B is different? What if I see a building and you see, I don't know, a field? What if this isn't just here? She said, don't. I said, I'm just asking. She said, don't. Don't start doing that thing where you take a small problem and you scale it up until it's everything. This is a weird thing that happened in a weird spot on a mountain, and we're going to leave the weird spot and go back to the real world, and it's going to be fine. I said, the weird spot is the real world. We're standing in it. She said, I know where we're standing. She said it hard, not shouting. Elin doesn't shout. She gets very precise when she's angry. She said, I know where we're standing, and I know what I see, and I'm not going to stand here and be gaslit by my boyfriend about whether a wall exists. I said, I'm not gaslighting you. I'm telling you what I see. She said, you see a hole? I said, yes. She said, and you want me to accept that the wall I'm touching is a hole? I said, no. I want you to accept that we're both right. She said, we can't both be right. I said, I know. We stood there. The pipit was still singing. The sky was still blue. The world around us, in every direction except the 4 meters by 3 directly in front of us, was uniform, shared, agreed upon. The heather was heather. The rock was rock. The air was air. The only thing the world couldn't agree on was the thing we were looking at. And the thing we were looking at was the only thing that mattered. Because if a wall can be a hole and a hole can be a wall depending on who is looking, then what else? What else have we been standing next to each other and seeing differently for 3 years without knowing? This is when the other walkers came. 2 men, mid-50s, matching waterproofs. They came over the rise from the trail, and one of them saw us in the bowl and waved, and the other one pointed at the tape, and the first one called down, you know you're in the restricted area, yeah? I waved. I said, we're coming out. They waited for us on the trail. We climbed out of the bowl. The first man, English, friendly, the kind of person who walks with trekking poles and a proper map in a waterproof case, said, they've got that taped off for the survey. The archaeologists come out in September, I think. I said, we saw the sign. We just wanted a quick look. He said, anything interesting down there? Elin said, a building. I said, a foundation. The 2 men looked at each other. The second man said, which is it? Ellen said, a building. I said at the same time, a hole. We looked at each other. The 2 men laughed. The first man said, can't agree on the archaeology, huh? That's marriage for you. We're not married. Ellen didn't correct him. We thanked them and they walked on, and we stood on the trail on the right side of the tape, and we did not look at each other for a while. She said, you said a hole. I said, it is a hole. She said, I was standing right there. I said a building. You contradicted me in front of strangers. I said, I told them what I see. She said, you told them what you see, and what you see makes me look like I'm making things up. I said, Ellen, I can't lie about what I see. She said, I'm not asking you to lie. I'm asking you to. She stopped. She was looking at me in a way I hadn't seen before. Not angry, something worse than angry. She was looking at me as if she were trying to decide whether I was the same person I had been an hour ago, when we had stepped over the tape together, when the ground had been one thing, and we had been one couple, and the world had been running on a single shared operating system. She said, show me your photo again. I showed her. The depression, the dark earth, the stones. She showed me hers, the walls, the lichen, the small plant in the crack. I said, Ellen, what if we go back down there and I try to see what you see? She said, you couldn't see it when you were standing inside it. I said, I know, but I want to try. She said, why? So you can stand in your hole and tell me again that my wall isn't real? I didn't know what to say to that. The thing I wanted to say, the honest thing, was, I believe your wall is real. I believe my hole is real. I believe we are standing in the same place, and the place is two things at once, and neither of us is wrong, and both of us are right. And this is not an argument about perception, but about the actual structure of the ground. And the ground has decided to show us two different versions of itself, and I don't know why, and I don't know what it means, and I am frightened. What I said was, can we just sit down for a minute? We sat down. We're still sitting. We've been sitting for, I don't know, 40 minutes? An hour? The sun has moved. The shadows on the heather have changed. Neither of us has looked back into the bowl by a kind of mutual agreement that was never spoken. Ellen said about 20 minutes ago, this isn't about the wall. I said, what's it about? She said, it's about you being willing to look at the same thing I'm looking at and see something completely different and treat your version as fact. I said, it is fact, for me, the same way yours is fact for you. She said, but we can't both have facts. That's not how facts work. Facts are the things we share. Facts are the things that hold. If you and I can stand in the same place and have different facts, then what do we actually share? What's the common ground? I said, each other. She said, that's not enough. And that, sitting here on this rock with the valley or the ridge in front of us and the trail behind us and the bowl to our left with its orange tape fluttering in a breeze I can feel. But Elin says isn't blowing in that sentence is the one I can't get past. That's not enough. 3 years, two calm, rational people, a shared flat, shared friends, shared plans. Not enough, because the ground showed us something the flat and the friends and the plans never showed us, which is that we have been living in two different versions of the same place all along, and we only found out because we stepped over a line we weren't supposed to cross. I want to ask her something. I've been wanting to ask it for 20 minutes, and I've been afraid to, because I think the answer is going to be the end of something. Aylin. She's looking at me now. I'm saying it. I'm asking. When you look at me right now, sitting here, do I look the same to you as I did this morning? She's not answering. Aylin, do I look the same? She says, she's taking a long time. She says, you look the same. I say, but? She says, but I keep thinking about the wall. I keep thinking, if I can touch a wall that you can't see, then what am I touching when I touch you? Is it the same you that you think you are? Or is it my version? I say, I'm not a wall. She says, how would I know? How would I know if the person I've been sleeping next to for 3 years is the same person you think you are? If the ground can do it, why can't? She stops. She puts her hands over her face. She sits like that for a while. The pipit is still singing. There's a cloud building in the west, very slowly, the kind that might bring rain in an hour. She says through her hands, I want to go back down. I say, into the bowl? She says, yes, I want to go back and I want to stand where the wall is, and I want you to stand next to me, and I want to try to touch the wall at the same time, and I want to see what happens. I say, what do you think will happen? She says, I think one of two things. Either you'll feel the wall this time, which means it changes, which means we can fix it, or you won't feel the wall, which means it doesn't change, which means... She takes her hands down. Her eyes are red, but she hasn't been crying. Her eyes get red when she's thinking hard. She says, which means the difference is in us, not in the ground. I say, and if the difference is in us? She says, then I need to know that. I need to know that now, today, on this mountain, before we walk back down and get in the car and drive to the B&B and eat dinner and go to bed and pretend that the ground is one thing. She's standing up. She's walking toward the tape. I should follow her. I'm going to follow her. I'm going to step over the tape and walk back down into the bowl and stand at the edge of whatever is there. The wall or the hole, the structure or the absence. And I'm going to put my hand where her hand is, and I'm going to feel whatever I feel. But I want to say this first before I follow her. I want to say it while she's ahead of me and can't hear it because the wind I can feel and she says she can't, is blowing toward me, away from her. I am afraid that when I put my hand on the wall, I will feel it. I am afraid that the wall will be there, real, warm, rough stone, and I will know that it was always there. And I chose the hole, and the choosing is the thing I did, the act that I committed here, today, in this beautiful, terrible place. I chose to see the absence when the presence was available. I chose the empty version. I looked at something that was there, and I saw what was missing instead of what remained. And if that's what I did, if the ground didn't do this to us, if I did this to us, if the hole was my reading and not the ground's offering, then Elin is right. The difference is in us. The difference has always been in us. And every time she leaned against something solid and I saw empty space, it wasn't the world lying. It was me, looking at the same love and seeing the gap where she sees she's calling me. She's at the tape. I have to go. I don't know what I'm going to feel when I put my hand on the wall. I don't know if the wall is going to be there for me this time. I don't know if the hole is going to be there for her. I don't know if we come back from this the same couple. She's calling my name again, and the wind is picking up, and I can feel it. And she